Picture this. You are standing on the dusty, blood-soaked plain of Uhud in the year 625. A young Qurayshi cavalry commander has just located a tiny gap in the Muslim line, a 30-yard opening left by overconfident archers chasing loot. He wheels his horsemen around a low ridge, slams into the unprotected flank, and shatters the army of the Prophet Muhammad in less than an hour. The Muslims flee. The Prophet himself is wounded, his tooth knocked out, his face streaming with blood. The man who orchestrated this disaster is 27 years old. His name is Khalid ibn al-Walid. 2 years from this moment, he will convert to Islam. 11 years from this moment, he will have personally commanded the destruction of 2 of the largest empires on earth. He will fight more than 100 pitched battles across the deserts of Arabia, the marshes of Iraq, and the river valleys of Syria. He will never lose a single one. Then his own government will fire him at the absolute peak of his power. Early Islamic chronicles like Al-Tabari's History of the Prophets and Kings do not bury this part of his story. They record it with chilling precision. The deadliest commander of the 7th century was dismissed from command not because he failed, but because he succeeded too completely. How does a man who never lost a battle get quietly erased from the empire he built? Before we dive into this forgotten story of brilliance and political betrayal, if you enjoy these deep dives into the hidden architects of history, consider hitting the like button and subscribing for more. And please drop a comment below telling me where you are listening from. I find it incredible that we can sit together across continents and centuries, connected by our shared curiosity about the men history almost forgot. Khalid was born around 592 into the Banu Makhzum, the military aristocracy of Mecca. The Makhzum did not control religion or commerce. They controlled the city's cavalry. From the time he could walk, Khalid was placed on horseback. His father, Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira, was one of the wealthiest men in Mecca, powerful enough that the Quran itself mentions him by description. Khalid grew up in a household where horses were valued above gold, and where a boy who could not throw a spear from a galloping mount by age 10 was considered a failure of the bloodline. He learned wrestling, archery, and the long horizontal slash of the Arab cavalry sword. He absorbed something else too. He absorbed the brutal economic logic of the Arabian Peninsula. Mecca survived on caravan trade. Every commercial route was a potential ambush site. Every water hole was contested territory. A tribe that lost control of its wells lost its children to thirst within a single summer. The romantic poetry of the era celebrated honor, courage, and the eloquent boast. Khalid quietly learned to ignore all of it. While older commanders shouted their lineages and challenged enemies to single combat, the young Khalid studied the practical mechanics. How long can a camel travel without water in summer? How many men can a single well support for one night? How fast can heavy cavalry close a 300-yard gap on broken ground? By his early 20s, he had developed a worldview that would have horrified most of his fellow aristocrats. He decided that battles were not contests of honor. Battles were mathematical problems of thirst, distance, and surprise. The man who controlled those 3 variables won. The man who chased glory died. To understand how Khalid weaponized his cold intellect, you have to understand the geopolitical wasteland surrounding 7th century Arabia. 2 superpowers had ruled the late antique world for centuries. The Byzantine Empire controlled the eastern Mediterranean from Constantinople. The Sassanid Persian Empire controlled Mesopotamia and Iran from Ctesiphon. For roughly 30 years, from 602 to 628, these 2 empires fought each other in one of the longest and most catastrophic wars in human history. Persian armies sacked Jerusalem and carried away the true cross. Byzantine armies counter-invaded all the way to the Persian capital. By the end, both empires had spent their treasuries, conscripted their farmers, and stripped their provinces bare. Then the plague of Justinian, which had been killing intermittently since 541, swept through their cities again. Tax revenues collapsed, veteran armies dissolved, border provinces stopped receiving pay. The two great Arab buffer kingdoms that had policed the Arabian frontier for generations, the Christian Ghassanids serving Byzantium and the Lakhmids serving Persia, were both disbanded by their bankrupt overlords in the same decade. The frontier emptied. Into this vacuum walked a new kind of organization. The Muslim community founded by Muhammad in Medina was small, mobile, and ideologically cohesive in a way no Arab confederation had ever been. It also operated on a principle that was almost unheard of in the ancient world. It rewarded competence over bloodline. A freed slave could command free-born aristocrats. A late convert could outrank a companion of the Prophet. The structure was almost identical in its meritocratic logic to the one Genghis Khan would build 6 centuries later, and it produced the same results. When Khalid finally converted to Islam in 627, he walked into a military system that did not care about his pagan past. It only cared about whether he could win. He could. In June 632, Muhammad died. Within weeks, roughly half of the Arabian Peninsula renounced Islam. Some refused to pay the religious tax. Others followed rival prophets who had sensed the opening. The most dangerous of these was a man named Musaylima, who had built a personal religious movement in the fertile region of Yamama in central Arabia, and now commanded an army of 40,000 fighters from the powerful Banu Hanifa tribe. The new Caliph Abu Bakr faced a crisis that should have shattered the Muslim state in its first year. He had perhaps 13,000 reliable troops scattered across a continent of rebellion. He divided them into 11 columns and assigned each a region. The hardest assignment, the destruction of Musaylima, went to Khalid. Most commanders would have refused. Musaylima's army outnumbered Khalid's roughly 2-to-1 and was fighting on its home ground. Khalid accepted without comment. The two armies collided at the Battle of Yamama in December 632. The first day went badly. The Muslim line broke. Veterans of the Prophet's earliest battles were cut down in heaps. Khalid did something on the second day that no Arab commander had ever done. He pulled his army apart and reorganized it by tribe. Each clan fought together under its own banner. He had calculated something cruel and accurate. Tribal pride was stronger than religious unity in a crisis. Men would die rather than let their cousins watch them flee. Al-Tabari's chronicle records the resulting carnage in a single chilling phrase. The fighting reached the walled garden where Musaylima had taken his final stand, and the Muslims climbed the walls and killed everyone inside. The Garden of Death, the Arabs called it afterward. 21,000 of Musaylima's followers died. Around 1,200 Muslims died with them, including a significant portion of the men who had memorized the Quran by heart. Khalid had crushed the largest rebellion in early Islamic history in a single afternoon. He had also demonstrated something his peers had not yet understood. He lacked the religious hesitation other commanders felt about killing fellow Arabs. To him, the math was simple. A rebel army was a rebel army. The faster you destroyed it, the fewer of your own men died in the long run. In the spring of 633, with Arabia pacified, Caliph Abu Bakr looked east and made a decision that should have ended the caliphate in its second year. He ordered Khalid to invade the Sassanid Persian Empire. Consider the mathematics of this assignment. The Sassanid Empire stretched from modern Iraq to modern Afghanistan and contained perhaps 25 to 30 million people. Its standing army numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Its capital, Ctesiphon, was one of the largest cities on earth. Khalid was given 18,000 men and told to take Iraq. He invaded in March 633 and over the next 11 months fought 5 major engagements. Each one demonstrated the principle he had developed as a boy in the Meccan stables. Control thirst, distance, and surprise. At the Battle of Chains in April, he attacked a Persian force that had literally chained itself together to demonstrate that no man would retreat. Khalid let them anchor themselves in place, then maneuvered around their flank and slaughtered them where they stood. At the Battle of the River days later, he trapped a relief force against the Euphrates and killed thousands as they tried to swim across in armor. The physical hardship his men endured during these campaigns is documented in horrifying detail. Soldiers drank from the stomachs of slaughtered camels in the deep desert. Horses collapsed and died on forced marches. Wounded men were strapped to saddles and kept moving because stopping meant the entire column would run out of water. The Persian satraps could not predict Khalid's movements because he refused to behave like a normal army. He attacked from directions no road existed. He appeared at dawn after marching through the night. He withdrew from positions he had just captured, drew the Persians out, and ambushed them in the open. The Sassanid command structure, accustomed to centuries of predictable warfare against Byzantines and Hephthalites, simply could not adapt, and the Caliph in Medina was about to give Khalid an order that would test the limits of human endurance. The Battle of Walaja in May 633 deserves to be studied in every military academy on earth. It almost never is. The Persians had finally assembled a coordinated response. A general named Andarzaghar marched south with a field army roughly twice the size of Khalid's force, supplemented by Arab Christian auxiliaries who knew the local terrain. He found Khalid waiting on an open plain near the modern Iraq-Saudi border. The ground was almost featureless. Sand, low dunes, scattered scrub. Andarzaghar saw what he expected to see, a smaller enemy force in a thin defensive line with no obvious tricks available. He ordered a frontal assault. What he did not see were Khalid's 2 cavalry reserves. Khalid had concealed them the night before behind 2 sets of dunes, one to the north and one to the south of the battlefield. He had ordered them to remain hidden no matter what happened to the main line. The Persian center pushed forward. The Muslim center gave ground. Slowly, deliberately, Khalid led his middle retreat in good order, pulling the Persians deeper into a shallow envelopment. When the Persian line was fully committed and stretched, Khalid raised a signal. Both hidden cavalry reserves came over their respective dunes at full gallop and slammed into the Persian rear simultaneously. The Persian army folded inside out. Andarzaghar himself was killed in the rout. The maneuver Khalid executed at Walaja is the double envelopment. It is the same maneuver Hannibal used at Cannae in 216 BCE to destroy a Roman army 8 centuries earlier. There is no evidence Khalid had ever heard of Hannibal. He reinvented the most lethal tactic in ancient warfare in the middle of the desert using cavalry instead of infantry, against an enemy that outnumbered him, on featureless ground where hiding entire formations should have been impossible. Think about the coordination required. No radios. No flags visible across the dust. No high ground for signals. Khalid synchronized 2 hidden reserves and a retreating center using nothing but prearranged timing and his own reputation for ruthlessly punishing officers who deviated from orders. After Walaja, the Persian frontier collapsed. By the end of 633, Khalid had taken Hira, the old Lakhmid capital, and was preparing to push towards Ctesiphon itself. Then a courier arrived from Medina, carrying an order that should have been physically impossible to execute. Early 634, the situation in Syria had become catastrophic for the Muslim forces. 4 separate Muslim armies were pinned down by Byzantine field forces under the command of the Emperor Heraclius's brother Theodore. The Caliph Abu Bakr made a decision that defied every rule of ancient logistics. He wrote to Khalid in Iraq and ordered him to leave his current campaign immediately, take a portion of his army, and assume overall command in Syria. The problem was geography. The conventional route from Iraq to Syria followed the Euphrates north and then turned west, a journey of roughly 800 miles that took 2 to 3 months. Khalid did not have 2 to 3 months. The Muslim armies in Syria would be destroyed before he arrived. Between Iraq and central Syria lay the Syrian desert, a waterless, sun-scorched expanse that every commander in the ancient world had avoided for over 1,000 years. Roman generals, Persian generals, Bedouin raiders, all of them treated the deep desert as a hard barrier. Khalid looked at the map and decided to cross it. The method he used is documented by multiple early Islamic sources, and it is extraordinary. He selected the strongest camels in his army. He force-fed them water until their stomachs were distended. Then he sewed their lips partially shut to prevent them from chewing cud and losing the water. Each of these camels became a living water container. Over an 18-day march, he slaughtered them at pre-calculated intervals, drained the stored water from their stomachs, and distributed it to his men and horses. He covered roughly 500 miles of waterless desert. He crossed terrain that Byzantine intelligence had assumed was impassable. He arrived on the Byzantine flank from a direction no army in recorded history had ever come from. The Byzantine commanders received reports they refused to believe. A Muslim army had appeared at Suwa, behind their lines, in a region where no army could possibly have arrived. The reports were accurate. Khalid had bypassed 2 months of expected travel time and now stood between the Byzantines and their supply bases. He had not yet fought a Byzantine soldier in his life. Within 18 months, he would destroy the entire Byzantine field army in the east. The Battle of Yarmouk did not happen by accident. Khalid spent more than 2 years preparing the battlefield. Through the spring and summer of 634, he won a series of smaller engagements that pushed the Byzantines back toward their main bases. At Ajnadain in July 634, he destroyed a Byzantine field force of roughly 20,000 men. The Caliph Abu Bakr died days later in Medina and was succeeded by Umar. Umar, who would prove to be one of the most consequential rulers in Islamic history, had a complicated relationship with Khalid that we will return to. By 635, the Muslims had taken Damascus. The Byzantine Emperor Heraclius, watching his Eastern Empire dissolve, made a final desperate decision. He emptied his treasury, conscripted every available man, hired Armenian, Arab Christian, and Slavic mercenaries, and assembled the largest field army the Byzantine Empire could still produce. Modern historians estimate the force at somewhere between 80,000 and 150,000 men. Khalid had approximately 40,000. Outnumbered between 2 and 4 to 1, Khalid did not panic. He withdrew. He gave up Damascus, gave up Homs, gave up every city he had captured, and pulled his entire force back to a position he had personally scouted months earlier. The Yarmouk River Valley sits on the modern border between Syria and Jordan. The river itself flows through a series of deep gorges and ravines, cutting the landscape into a maze of dead ends and chasms. Khalid had walked the ground himself. He had mapped every ravine, every dry wadi, every approach route. He chose the Yarmouk specifically because the Byzantine numerical advantage would become a trap. A massive army cannot maneuver on broken ground. It can only push forward, and if it has to retreat, it has nowhere to go but into the gorges. He also weaponized the weather. The region experiences seasonal dust storms in late summer that blow consistently from east to west. Khalid positioned his army on the eastern side of the field. He waited for August. The Battle of Yarmouk began on August 15, 636, and lasted 6 days. The early Islamic chronicler Al-Waqidi describes the fighting in detail that reads like a horror film. On the first day, the 2 armies tested each other in cautious skirmishes. On the second and third days, the Byzantines pressed forward and the Muslim wings bent but did not break. On the 4th day, the Byzantine cavalry under the Armenian general Vahan launched a coordinated assault that finally cracked the Muslim left wing. Muslim soldiers began streaming back toward their camp. What happened next is recorded by Al-Waqidi and several other sources. The women in the Muslim camp, the wives and daughters and sisters who had followed the army on campaign, picked up tent poles, cooking implements, and stones. They formed a line at the camp's edge and beat their own fleeing men back into the fight. They shouted that any man who ran would find no welcome in his own tent. The Muslim left wing reformed and held. Khalid had watched the entire collapse from a position in the center. He had been waiting for exactly this moment. On the 6th day, August 20, the seasonal dust storm finally arrived. The wind came hard out of the east, directly into the faces of the Byzantine line. Visibility on the Byzantine side dropped to 20 yards. The Muslims, with the wind at their backs, could see clearly. Khalid had also identified something during the previous days of fighting. There was a gap of roughly 200 yards between the Byzantine cavalry on the right and the main Byzantine infantry line. He had concealed his entire reserve cavalry force, roughly 8,000 horsemen, behind a low ridge to his rear. As the dust storm hit, he pulled this reserve in a single coordinated movement around the back of his own army and slammed it into the gap. The Byzantine cavalry was sheared off from the infantry. Khalid then drove the cut-off cavalry units northward, away from the main battle, where they could not return to help. The Byzantine infantry, now without cavalry support, blinded by dust, found themselves being pushed backward step by step. They were being pushed toward the ravines of the Yarmouk Gorge. By late afternoon, the retreat became a panic. The panic became a rout. Tens of thousands of Byzantine soldiers fell into the chasms behind them. Vahan was killed. Other Byzantine commanders died trying to organize a last stand. The Eastern Roman Empire lost Syria forever in a single afternoon. Heraclius, hearing the news in Antioch, is recorded by Byzantine sources as having said farewell to Syria and ridden north. He never returned. Khalid had just destroyed in 6 days an empire that had stood for 700 years. A few weeks after Yarmouk, while the Muslim armies were still consolidating their hold on Syria, a courier arrived from Medina with a message for Khalid. The new Caliph Umar had formally dismissed him from command. He was to be replaced by Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, a quiet and pious companion of the Prophet who had served loyally but had never commanded a major battle. Khalid read the dismissal letter, mounted his horse, rode to Abu Ubaidah's tent, and pledged his obedience. He served the rest of his career as a subordinate officer under the man who had replaced him. The official reason for the dismissal varies depending on which early Islamic source you read. Some say Umar disapproved of Khalid's distribution of war spoils. Others say Umar had a personal dislike of Khalid dating back to a controversial execution Khalid had ordered years earlier. But the most credible reason, recorded by al-Tabari and accepted by most modern historians, is the one Umar himself gave. He said he feared that Muslims were beginning to credit victories to Khalid rather than to God. He said the caliphate could not afford a general so successful that his name became larger than the cause he served. Read that reasoning carefully. Umar did not fire Khalid for failure. Umar fired him for being too good. This is the calculation that every long-lasting political organization eventually makes. A military genius who never loses becomes a threat to the legitimacy of the state itself, because the people start to believe that victory belongs to him rather than to the institution he serves. Stalin made the same calculation about Marshal Zhukov after the Second World War. The Roman Senate made it about Scipio Africanus after Carthage. Umar made it about Khalid in 638. Khalid lived another 4 years. He served as an ordinary soldier in minor campaigns. He retired to the city of Homs, the same city he had captured years earlier. He died in bed in 642 at roughly 50 years old. The death scene recorded by multiple Islamic sources is heartbreaking. He looked down at his own body, which was covered in scars from more than 100 battles, and he wept. He said something close to this. I have sought martyrdom in every battle, and I could not find it. Every inch of my body bears a wound from a spear or an arrow or a sword. And now I die in bed like a worn-out camel. May the eyes of cowards never know peace. The man who had killed tens of thousands of enemies died grieving that none of them had managed to kill him. Khalid's tactical innovations did not enter Western military education for 1,300 years. European military theorists studied Hannibal, Caesar, Alexander, and eventually Napoleon. They did not study the Arab commander who had reinvented Cana in the desert and destroyed the Byzantine field army in a week. His campaigns survived only in Arabic chronicles, read mostly by Islamic historians and the occasional Orientalist scholar. Then, in the late 20th century, something interesting happened. American military planners preparing for combat in the Middle East began encountering references to Khalid in Arab military literature. General Norman Schwarzkopf, planning Operation Desert Storm in 1990 and 1991, reportedly studied Khalid's desert campaigns in detail. The famous left hook maneuver that Schwarzkopf used to envelop the Iraqi army in Kuwait, sending coalition forces in a wide arc through what was supposed to be impassable desert, was not a new American invention. It was an updated version of the same logic Khalid had used to cross the Syrian desert in 634. Modern Arab military academies in Jordan, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia teach Khalid's campaigns as foundational doctrine. The British strategist B.H. Liddell Hart, who rediscovered the strategic principles of indirect approach in the 20th century and influenced the development of German blitzkrieg, identified Khalid's campaigns as among the purest examples of his theory ever executed. Look at the principles Khalid demonstrated more than 1,300 years ago: mobility over mass, speed over numbers, logistics as a weapon, psychological paralysis through unpredictability. The willingness to abandon captured territory to draw an enemy onto chosen ground, the use of terrain and weather as force multipliers, the reorganization of armies by social cohesion rather than rank. Every one of these principles is taught in modern military academies as if it were a 20th century discovery. Khalid had operationalized all of them by the year 636. I think the deepest lesson of his story is not military, it is political. The greatest reward a strategist can receive from the state he serves is to be quietly retired before he becomes a threat. Khalid accepted his dismissal without protest because he understood the calculation. A movement that depends on a single man for its victories is a movement that will not outlast that man. By removing him, Umar made Islam larger than Khalid. By accepting his removal, Khalid made himself a permanent part of Islam. He chose the cause over his own legacy, and the cause rewarded him by partially forgetting him. We remember Napoleon, who lost his final battle and died on a remote island. We remember Hannibal, who lost his final campaign and committed suicide in exile. We remember Caesar, who was assassinated by his own Senate. We do not, in the broader Western imagination, remember the man who fought more than 100 battles, never lost one, and died peacefully in bed grieving that he had not died sooner. Why is that? Why does history seem to require a tragic ending in order to remember a name? Why do we remember the commanders who fell, but forget the architect who never did? Thank you for traveling through this story with me. If you found this dive into the mind of Islam's most lethal, forgotten commander valuable, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. Tell me in the comments which other undefeated commander you think history has erased. Stay curious, and I will see you in the next video.